Hello, everyone. This is Jason Fierno representing the Mining Mavericks. The Mining Mavericks are a curated group of industry leaders who are passionate about making the industry better and more sustainable for everyone. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Lindsey Schultz. Lindsey is currently the CEO of MRC. Lindsey, what's shaking?
Not much. Thanks for having me, Jason. I appreciate your time and the invitation.
Absolutely. So just real brief bio. You've got about 15 years of experience at MRC, where you're focused on building great teams for mining companies. I love that MRC is a family business. So can you give us a bit more of what you do?
Absolutely. So my dad started our company in 1984 out of our home, and he had done recruiting prior to that, but decided that it was time to do his own thing. And he's sort of an entrepreneur at heart, so he didn't want to report to anybody else, and had a great idea and some experience under him. So he started MRC. I was a year old at the time. And he bought a house and had a family and got married and all that stuff in a year. And so his joke is always that, he's not risk adverse, right? Enter me, who is a bit more cautious, but I have been working with my dad basically my whole life. And so it's been a really interesting upbringing. We had people working out of our home. I collected resumes out of the mail at the time, so this is dating me, but and copied them off the fax machine and all that stuff. So my introduction to recruiting happened at a relatively early age, I guess. And so I never really got away from it. I didn't plan to work with him, but I got done with college and my bachelor's was in human resources. And after several interviews, I quickly decided that I didn't want to do that in a traditional sense. And so I started working with my dad. And here we are 16 years later. So that's kind of taken its own, I guess, lifespan. And so I worked formerly on the HR side, now more on the mining side, and that's our focus at this point. We can do HR consulting as well, but we primarily act as a recruiter for the mining industry, and look to bring in talent at a variety of areas. Have sort of branched more into technical recruiting over the past few years as a necessity for our clients, but our sweet spot tends to be management, C-level and up from there. So that's sort of what we do.
Okay, cool. No, I think that's helpful to understand. And you and I have spoken about it a little bit, but what I find particularly interesting, and one of the things that I really want to chat with you about today, given your unique vantage point, is, what is the status of, I call it the labor pool, labor market, resources, however you want to coin it. But from your perspective, what are the trends? What are you seeing, and kind of what are the trends, perhaps?
This past 2 years has been interesting. I think COVID has exacerbated a lot of what we forecasted several years ago, being that our more senior leaders are exiting the marketplace. And I think in this time period, they've had better pricing to do so. And so it's kind of helped some of them decide to retire or to go to consulting and say, this is a pain. I'm not getting things done the way that I forecasted or featured at this point. I have to do remote meetings. I can't travel, whatever it is. I mean, these guys have been in the industry, at some of them 40 plus years. And so we knew that we were going to have a lot of attrition and retirement happening at the top, but we're starting to see that. And I think, probably more than 5% in the last year has just been COVID related at that side. But what we've also seen is in the meat of the market, so being between 5 to 20 years of experience, there just aren't enough people to go around. And mining is cyclical, as we're all aware, but it's been so up and down that there aren't people, going to school for it as much. The numbers that are coming out of school haven't been as high as we need them to be. And even when they graduate from a mining school, it doesn't guarantee that they're going to stay in our industry. And that's something that we've seen more in the past few years than maybe ever before. I think we've seen them go to construction or oil and gas previously, but more recently, some of the sexier areas like Tesla and Amazon and Google and Facebook and tech areas are absorbing some of our talent, pretty rapidly because the skill sets are transferable, and we haven't been as imaginative on our end to keep them and attract them as they have been. So I've heard from a number of individuals at senior levels with big mining companies saying, I can't keep these people for whatever reasons. And we can talk about what those reasons are, but it's been really difficult. So that meat of the market is really underserved at the moment.
You said that's folks with 5 to 20 years?
That's a big chunk, right? So those are the doers though. So from an entry level all the way up to management, we're missing those individuals. Once we get to more senior leadership roles, we've got people to move around, I think, and those that are hungry to get into them that haven't had the ability to have that senior management person retire or mentor them into something. So they're hungry for it, but they haven't been able to move forward, where anything below that mid to senior management level is pretty supply challenged.
Yeah. I think that's becoming more and more obvious to me than ever before. We could see the trend that was happening with the senior folks that are now, 40 years plus, that are either consulting because they love the industry or playing golf or pinochle, whatever it is that people do when they stop working. But it's and then there's that group, frankly, that you and I fall in, and many others that I call the new generation of leaders. And then it's the gap behind us. And that's the one that scares the shit out of me, to be totally honest with you, because it just does. It really, really does, based on the reliance of our species on our industry relative to the talent to actually build new mines and operate mines. It's kind of scary.
It's really scary, and you're on that other side in terms of trying to make big projects happen. And so I imagine the reliance upon human capital, I hate that term, but human capital is really important. And to figure out how to attract them and retain them is the challenge of our leadership at this point. But I think that there's so much cool stuff that mining does. And our ability to have a voice and talk about it and educate people earlier. And this is something that I've talked about for years, and I know other people are certainly echoing the sentiment. So it's not an original thought, but mining has been really bad about saying we do good stuff too. We always hear about the negative things. We always hear about there being a land dispute or a bridge or a dam failing or injuries or whatever, but you aren't always being hit in front with news that says, do you want your Tesla? It turns out you need mining. Or, that thing that's attached to your hand at every moment of the day, turns out you need mining. So there's a lot that happens, and all of our agriculture and infrastructure and everything else is relying upon our industry. And so I think we are starting to see leaders who are addressing this in terms of a more positive approach, but that is what's going to draw a younger demographic to our industry, and seeing that they can influence and make a difference positively with these contributions. And that is the point about Gen Z that we need to understand more and more, because they are the largest generation that we've seen. So baby boomers were big. We sort of trickled off for Gen X and millennials after that, but the next generation coming in is huge. And I have numbers somewhere, but I don't want to click around my screen and be crazy too much. So the ability to create a vision for them that lets them contribute positively and make a difference is what they're all about. And then figuring out how to, compensate them creatively, because that's another component of what they're asking for. And a lot of them are still in school, so they don't know what they want. But I think we've got room to figure this out in some time if we're creative.
Okay, well, let's unpack that a little bit. But before we do, I need you to educate me. What is the age range of Gen Z right now, more or less?
So Gen Z, they were born between 97 and 2010.
Okay.
And it's like something ridiculous, like 67 million Generation Z between US and Canada.
Wow.
That's a lot of people.
It really is. I mean, that in and of itself is encouraging, but
Well, there's a lot of uphill battles having that number of people, right? But it's a lot of people to potentially attract to do something good too.
Yeah, I'm just writing something down real quick.
Uh,
So, no, totally. Not this is not the words you use, but what I extracted from that was that Gen Z, or there were two things that I extracted from that, and you can expand on them or correct me or whatever. But essentially, what I heard is they want to make an impact, and then creative compensation. So maybe you can talk us through in more definitive terms what I know those weren't your words. I don't remember what they were, but what
no,
is
that's
the
good.
make an impact statement? Can you give us some more context or color to that?
Yeah. So we just worked on two little newsletters that we're gonna, or blog entries, whatever, for our website on this. So we did part one focusing more on Gen Z and or Generation X and millennials. And then the second part really focusing on Gen Z. And so it's interesting for me to look at this because these are the people I get to deal with, and we're characterizing them with very broad brush strokes, right? And so there is no sort of absolute qualifier what makes them Gen Z or not.
Sure.
But these guys are sort of cautious a little bit. They are worried about their costs for education. They're worried about how do they make a difference and how are they valued. And so they want to have a plan. And so it's really interesting at such a young age that these are some of the things that we're using to describe them from my perspective. They don't want to just be doing one thing. And so they're very dynamic. They've always had technology in their back pocket. They've been raised with this and never really knew, a house phone or life without the internet. And so they are also cognizant of the fact that they may have weak interpersonal skills. And so this creates a lot of opportunity for us just in trying to figure out who they are and what we do. And so part of that is compensating them. And it's not always a base salary that's attractive to them. More than ever, they're looking at sort of a total package. And so this doesn't mean what we call work-life balance as millennials. This has to do with flexible working arrangements, meaning they can work from home, they can work from an office, they can work from, a team-centered environment or whatever it might look like for them. But they need some mentorship. And I guess are willing to ask for that in some cases at a very, very early stage because they recognize they don't have all the answers, which is great. We haven't seen that in other generations. And so how do we compensate them? We have to understand their motivators. And so that would be part of it. So whether it's flexible PTO programs or figuring out how to create a dynamic working environment where they have mentors, or some kind of continuing education for them while they're working, just so that they stay on top of things. I think we'll have to be a little bit dynamic in how we perform around their total comp packages.
You said a few things you said interesting things, but there's one thing that I want to understand a little bit better, perhaps. I think you said something along the lines that they recognize they may have weak interpersonal skills. There's actually an awareness of that they're admitting.
They have admitted this, and so we've done lots of research, and I can't off the top of my head tell you where I'm getting this, but they do know that because they are so reliant upon chat and messages and whatever, that verbally and as a face-to-face scenario, they're not that good. And actually, I think that awareness trickles up to sort of our millennial group as well. And so the younger millennials definitely have sort of a stigma that they don't return phone calls, that they don't engage at the same level. Millennials are a big group, and or I guess across a large generation. So we have people that had house phones and didn't have internet, all the way to people that are a bit younger and have always had that. And so it's an interesting generation to study a little bit. But both groups for Gen Z at an older age, and then Gen millennials, from a younger age know that they are not sort of on the forefront of developing these interpersonal relations. And so we're always coaching them to say, you need to engage. And my dad is the best at that, and saying, networking and people are sort of your lifeline, and it's a very small world. And so you need to figure out how to cultivate these relationships all of the time. And it's a really hard practice for some.
First of all, I'm encouraged, truthfully, that there's a self-awareness of the lacking of interpersonal skills. I mean, that honestly, that gives me a little bit of a little bit more hope than watching my teenagers do whatever they do next to their friends with their phones. And it's like, you're sitting right next to each other. You're touching each other.
Are you talking to each other on your phones, or are you like having...
And they totally are. It's crazy. So that there's an appreciation that with that, I think there's a light and dark to everything. So the dark side of that is that you don't foster or develop those interpersonal skills, which I think are super, super important.
I think so too. And I'm actually really interested to see sort of what happens, because we've moved so much to remote work, that when you're not face to face in an office and developing these more personal in real life situations,
Sure.
how are you going to get a mentor? Because are you really going to reach out and try to cultivate that virtually? And I think we've tried to do that through an array of other areas. I know SME is doing a lot of work around this. I know Women in Mining is doing a lot of work around mentoring and developing these relationships. And even the AEMA is trying to kind of construct something that would allow more structured mentors to happen. But I really am fearful that without some kind of routine or daily engagement, that we're going to be missing that connection for these individuals that coming in.
Yeah, sure. I could see that. I could absolutely see that. I think we've discovered that you can do a lot virtually. At the same time, 100% virtual isn't the answer, and 100% in person is not the answer either. But it's interesting to think about the mentorship. And I reflect back on my career, and I look at the fact that when I was young, a few years into the industry, I had, a couple of individuals that, I don't know if I entertained them or they just liked somebody to carry their bags, but whatever the case, they took the time to take me under their wing and show me the ropes, and also let me fail and make mistakes so that I would learn. And I'll forever be grateful and indebted to them for doing that. So I really like the idea that you're talking about, that maybe it's time to put some more emphasis on that kind of thing, because I think it's over time is kind of dissolved. What do you think?
I agree. I think that it has, and without, and a lot of our roles in mining to some degree are in the field or require being in the same place with other people. And so I'm encouraged that we still have that to a degree, in more of the corporate functions that could die off, but those individuals tend to network better anyway. And so, but in the field, I'm happy that, and those are individuals that I see and talk to all the time, that are really helpful. I'm not technical by background. I've gotten to learn, and I've gone to mind, and I've had a lot of people who are willing to answer my questions. But I think that that's what is really beautiful about our industry, is that even though there's occasionally some ego attached to it, a lot of times these guys just love what they do, and therefore they want to share that. And I think that that's really powerful in creating relationships, but also in creating a mentor strategy for somebody. Because if you're passionate about what you do, the younger people will see it, and they'll also be attracted to it. And there's no reason to misguide them, right? Because they're doing work for you. So everybody's sort of got a mutual interest. And when you can adopt one another and make a relationship work, short-term, long-term, whatever, it's really a fantastic thing. So I'm hopeful that that continues in the field, and that we continue to see that with some of these other roles that aren't requiring as much in-person. I think we've got build other ways of getting that to these guys or to these kids that are entering. I hate to call them kids, but they kind of are.
They're totally kids.
They're kids to me.
They're kids to me too. I'm a kid to me, so that,
I know. Well, there's that part too.
yeah, I don't think I quite am born in the 90s or whatever. Yeah. So, okay, I understand. What do you see? What are innovative approaches that you see that you're like, oh man, I wish people would do more of that? And then the flip side to that is like, what is the stuff that you see that's so stupid that it pisses you off?
Oof. I have to say I'm seeing a bit of both. So
Of course, that's why I gave you both. That's why you get both.
Yep. So I'm going to go with what is really frustrating, I think, and then we'll go to the positive side. What's
Okay.
really frustrating is there's a lot of talent in the
Hmm.
world, period. They don't necessarily have to come from a mining school to be valuable in our industry. And I think sometimes looking outside the box could be really good for us. And so some companies are much better at doing that than others. But I think that we do have such limited resources on hand at present that we're going to have to figure out ways of using other people and attracting them. But what's really frustrating is companies are, especially large companies, are particularly bad at what I call the candidate experience. And candidate experience is essentially how you treat the individual interest in your company. And if you aren't responsive, you don't follow up after an interview, you don't give them any feedback. When you have a job in 6 years, they remember that. When you have a job in 6 months, they remember that. They're not going to call you back because they right now are the commodity and they don't have to. They'll find a job with somebody else. So unless you treat people like people and that they're valued, they're going to stop going to you. And these large organizations have not figured that out, but yet they're so pressed for talent that some of them are actually shutting down operations because they don't have enough people.
Wow.
And you know how costly that is. So, I mean, I can give you examples of several that have had to do this recently. And it's just like, if you would return a phone call, make the process less automated, and provide some feedback, you would have choices. There are people out there to do these roles, or be a little bit of creative in your approach and say, this guy's great and he's got 40 years of experience and he can help and mentor you into this. And we have to create these sort of informal mentorships or knowledge transfer scenarios within companies so that you can get from point A to point C, because sometimes there's no point B. And so they just have been really, really bad at that candidate experience and figuring out how to do knowledge transfer. So that for me is probably the most frustrating thing that I see routinely. On the positive side, we're sort of moving that direction where we're seeing individuals say, or companies say, this guy doesn't exist in the form that we want. So we're going to hire, this guy who has a wealth of knowledge and experience and only wants to work as a consultant for X period of time, but he can shepherd this individual into the role. And I have a client now who's looked at individuals doing that, as well as training from within, or looking at, technical colleges or colleges nearby and saying, we can do this with your students, and this is what we need, and this is how we'll do it. We'll go from an intern to a specialist to a whatever, and we've got a path forward for these people as long as they are good and willing to work. And so rather than looking for a year or two for whatever it is, they're willing to essentially take them directly out of school and train them. And we haven't seen that receptiveness for a long time. And I think it creates a sense of loyalty in some regard, because you've invested into these individuals who wouldn't have a job otherwise potentially at a very early stage, or created a pipeline for them to go through within your organization where they continue to learn and can grow professionally and personally, hopefully. So that's the encouraging side.
That is encouraging. I mean, for me personally, I was raised by an engineer. My dad worked in the same company for 30 plus years, and I was taught, go to school, get a degree, go work for a company, spend your life there, retire, get your pension, play golf, which is what my dad does. and I'm proud of him and happy for him for that. However, for myself personally, my story is different. I spent time in a major mining company to get recruited to another one only to get laid off. And I thought, this is bullshit. The idea of maintaining that loyalty to employees, for me, in my experience, it was shown to me that doesn't exist like it used to, which is sad. So to hear you say that there's some actual conversation and thought and time, effort, and energy put into a career path progression that has an aspect of loyalty and longevity to it, I think that's really encouraging.
It's not all the time.
No, I know.
And I think you still have to sort of prepare for those instances, because mining is cyclical. And as much as you want this to be for a while, the company may not be able to sustain. And that's the harsh reality of our industry. But preparing yourself with a network, with relationships, with building some resiliency around your background and yourself, I think posture you better for the next opportunity. And sometimes we have to get there to realize that we're good at something else, or that we can apply ourselves in different ways. So I think that there's still hope in these cycles that we hit in mining, and I think a lot of creativity happens because of them. Even though it's a real blow, and everybody is having a bad day when you get that call and you're no longer sort of needing to be employed there. And so, but some of the best conferences I've been to while being a recruiter have been during the down times. And everybody wants to talk to you, and you don't have any jobs for them, but you develop these really great relationships. You help with resumes, you build this sort of rapport with one another, and commiserate over a beer or whatever, and tell them, you'll be in touch with something. And eventually we try to be, but I think it's interesting to create loyalty with people around you, because they'll help you when you need it, or when they have the opportunity to, especially if you do good work. And so again, we go back to the networking component or the mentor component, where you're sort of insulating yourself with this team.
Yeah, I really like that concept. I'm latching onto it. My mind is latching onto it. But I want to flash back to something that you had said previously and draw a correlation. You talked about the candidate experience. And I think you mentioned things like the simple things like call people back, or send an email, or have a conversation. It makes me think of a recent discussion with Deborah Mashek, who's got a PhD in psychology and is focused on collaboration. And we were having a conversation, a roundtable, like, what do you do to foster collaboration? Because we know that it works when done well. And what I thought was really interesting is she said, start small. And she said, even if it's that you're scheduling a meeting with somebody in a different time zone, let them know, I know this is early for you. Does that work? We can push it later to my time, whatever it is, but just even making mention that there's an awareness for the other person, she said, from a psychologist standpoint, goes a really, really long way. So I just want to emphasize the point that you're making, because I think it's really important to developing relationships in general.
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's incredibly frustrating to me in my role when people don't follow up. And I love creating relationships and introducing people, and so much of what we do isn't sort of matchmaking for companies. It's saying, hey, I don't have anything for you, but this guy's really cool, and you guys should know one another, or whatever. And if they develop a bond or a relationship or a rapport with one another, great. But part of that is following up. And I think and also saying, hey, I don't have the answer for you. And
Mm,
so often people come to us as a problem solver for them. They need a new role, they want a new role, they have a crappy manager, they have,
mm,
you know, a really hard commute. You know, they say, Lindsey, what else is out there? And, you know, I'm rendered worthless when I don't have the answer. But often, you know, if I don't have the role, maybe I have a person that could be valuable to you. So for me, I always try to create these synergies in people and ways they might be able to help each other, even if most of the time for me that goes unpaid or whatever. But if you don't follow up, I was still of no help. And so I'm a helper by nature. But I agree, just saying, I appreciate your time, or thank you for taking a meeting, whatever it is, just create sort of an awareness that you also appreciate them and that you know, their time is valuable and you're grateful for it. And it's huge. I mean, I reject people every day and they tell me thank you.
mm.
And never, I hate that part of my job, but it's inevitable. But when I follow up and say, I actually don't have feedback for you, but this is sort of what I saw, and it's a no-go on this one, but I look forward to staying in touch. And if I can help in any other way, let me know. I think it's just the way to do the right thing.
So powerful, so important, you know, and I can understand in your position why you would reject people a lot and nature of the business clearly, but kudos to you for taking the time to have that candid conversation with somebody, because that's how they're going to grow. That's how they're going to learn. That's how they're going to evolve and get better. So I just want to preach how important that is and what a
It's
skill that is in and of itself.
I have to make faces on that one because it's a it's a doozy. And I'm not always good at it. And I don't always have the answers, but I think sometimes just to say, I'm sorry, it didn't work out, and let's just stay in touch is the only thing left to do. So we do always try to follow up on something like that. But I have to say, I got into a lot of trouble with a woman who was a candidate for a role, and I emailed her because it was very, we talked, but it was a bit more transactional. There was a lot of people. I let her know that that was the case, and I followed up by email and said we didn't get past sort of an initial view at a resume, and this is why, and I appreciate your time and pursuing it. And she called me back, and like I got read the riot act. I
Really?
wasn't going to do any right, and so I now try to be mindful of actually making the phone call. But doing a phone call for every time I have to reject somebody, I could be on the phone literally all day, every day. And I also have to do the other side. So sometimes I wish that people recognize that, man, I don't have unlimited time either. And you're
Mm.
still very important to me, but I can't call everyone. And so I was like, I got in trouble. I felt really bad.
I'm a firm believer in the power of conversations, and I say this a lot, but I mean it. I judge the value of a life based on the number of meaningful human interactions you can have. And I think it's way easier to have a meaningful human interaction when you're in a two-way dialogue like we are right now. I hate email. I mean, I know it's a necessary evil, but I find that it's much easier to build a rapport with someone when you're involved in a conversation. So I think that's
Yeah.
really significant. But
It's true. It's occasionally difficult, and so managing workload is always a thing too.
absolutely, it's a balance,
You
like
know,
everything in life, right? I mean, it's
well,
a
or
balance.
struggle to find the balance. Maybe that is.
Yeah, fair enough. However you want to characterize it. I'm sure we could debrief on it later and you could let me know.
Thanks for telling me that one.
My pleasure. We can debrief in a conversation.
I'm trying to be appropriate.
Quick and easy debrief, no big deal. All right, so onward and upward. What would, in all of these conversations and debrief conversations that you're in, what is the most common misconception you hear about mining, or what's your perception of the misconceptions that you hear about?
Um, I think sometimes, so that's a good question. It's hard to answer. And the reason I say that is because within mining, we have a very different perception of it than
Mm,
from the exterior. And to be perfectly honest, I don't get to talk to that many people outside of mining unless I really seek that out at this point. But
sure.
I think a misconception about mining from, the rest of the world is that, it's bad. And that's really frustrating because we get so much from it. And we know that within mining, we know the need for it. I think within mining, to answer that question, often people have a bad experience, a bad manager, a shitty management team, whatever it looks like for them. And they get sort of jaded
Mm,
on what happens, and do they want to be a part of it. And I can't solve that all the time, but part of some of what we do is a little bit of social work because we get to hear all these stories and try to help sort of counsel them through that change or navigate that change, and to not have that negative perception of every manager or every
mm,
team that they work with. And that ideally, if they can be sensitive to what they want in a role and a management team, that they can find the right one. But part of that is being able to interview your employer as a candidate. And so
mm.
a lot of what we talk about sometimes is how to ask the right questions and what's important to you. And that, you do get a voice and a vote, and that you don't have to win every single job that's offered to you. So I think that would be the misperception that I get the most often, is just that, like, this is mining and this is how it is because they've come from sort of just this bad environment. And it doesn't have to be that way. I hope that answers the question.
It does. No, it does. It makes me think. You hit on asking the right questions, because I think it's not just a one-way street, it's back and forth. And I think that's true not only in the hiring candidate relationship, but I think that is true for a lot of relationships and the way that we engage. And it makes me think of a resource that I'm going to drop, which is there's a gentleman by the name of Andrew Sobel, an author, and he wrote a book called I think it's The Power Questions. Yeah. What is it?
Good
Power
idea.
Questions. Yeah. Build relationships, win new business, and influence others. Just a recommendation for folks that are interested in learning about the different types of questions and things like that. So a resource there that I would recommend to folks. The concept in my mind that's really ruminating is and somebody had said this to me in a conversation earlier, which was networking as a skill. And it's not something that's taught. And I think about, even in our relationship, you and I have obviously had previous conversations, and we've shared contacts and information with each other and introduced each other to different folks within the industry we thought you would connect with, I would connect with, whatever. What amazes me is that there is a lack of follow-up, and that I don't understand that. Honestly, I really don't. I mean, maybe it's just because of the way that I think and the way that I'm wired. I love being engaged in conversations. So I'd love the opportunity to be introduced to someone of high quality that has an interesting perspective, but damn, people suck at it.
It's yes, 100%. And I tell the story about several years ago speaking at a mining conference. It was a down market. I was talking to a bunch of geologists who were about to graduate with a panel of other individuals. And I said, send me your resume. I don't have anything to do. I'm happy to help however I can, whatever it is. Send me your resume, follow up. There were like 50 people in this room, and I got 2 resumes. That's sort of the right numbers. And so my dad always says, like, rules of 10 or whatever. And so we're, like, we see 100 candidates, we want to talk to 10, the client interviews 1. And so we distill down by tens here. And so I guess when I look at a room of 50 people, if I had 2 people that followed up, that wasn't too bad according to those numbers. But it just blew my mind, because if you have a free resource and somebody who's willing to help you, why wouldn't you do it? Why wouldn't you follow up in some way? And so that sort of, I guess, aligned my expectations for networking and following up when you're offering it. Still, it blows my mind, but I see it a lot, and I am very, very grateful for all of our candidates who follow up with me when I send an email and say, hey, there's X, Y, and Z job. And they say, oh, I know a guy. And it might not be the right one, but I always write them and say thank you and follow up with whoever they suggest. And again, it might not be fruitful, but it's such an important part of what I do, but also of valuing the other person who took the time to make that introduction. And so I think sometimes it's not really that people don't respect your time or don't like you or don't want to do it. It's that they don't always have something to talk about, or an immediate need or see an immediate need for that relationship. And so they don't pursue it. And so if they were like, oh, I'm out of work and I need to talk to this person, they'll call, as long as they know how to get it out of their own way. Right. But when it's like, hey, I think you guys are great, you should just talk. They're like, but about what? And what are they going to do? And what's expected of me? And it's this idea of the unknown that's really scary, and people just don't know what to do. So I've been trying actually to be more conscious of the fact that I need to create these introductions with a purpose, more than like just being loosey-goosey about it, because I think the follow-through might be better. So it's sort of on my list of trying to figure out.
Yeah, that the idea of having a purpose behind the conversation, I think is an interesting one. It reminds me, and I'll be dropping books all over the place.
I know, I'm just writing lists. So here I go.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. I'll find it, but it's I don't know why I can't. I think my library got organized or unorganized, but oh, that's because it's on an audiobook. I'll make sure to pull it up and give it to you, but it's on my phone. But I think it's something like Why We Gather, I think is the name of it.
I have that book. I haven't read it yet. I just ordered it.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Well, there you go.
I could run into the other room and get it, but yeah, it's on my like, I always have sort of a running bookshelf of things that I need to read when I find time, and that's on there. So let me know.
Running and floating.
Yeah.
Your bookshelves are up there. They're pretty special.
This is the floating one. So
yeah.
Next time, maybe I'll show you the other one.
I know mine's a audiobook, which is why I don't see it here. But anyway, so a question that I want to ask is like, and this is a question my team has come up with, but are there more people hiring? Are they less? Like, kind of give us a sense of, what the marketplace is like. Are people, I'll just shut up and let you talk.
Yep. More. There's more need for people, period. So the last year and a half, I mean, COVID, we've actually had a really good mining market. And so things have been up, and companies have had money and resources and needs for individuals. And so we had sort of a knee-jerk reaction, I think, immediately as an industry, as a world, to try to figure out what we needed to do. And some of that slowed things down. But it was very brief in my experience within our industry. And so projects have kept going. They just look a little different. I mean, maybe consultants aren't moving around as much, but they're still doing work from home. They've figured out how to stagger shifts at mines. So we really didn't have a lot of a downturn from it. I think the most impacted out of that group were probably sales individuals, because they couldn't get around as much, but the product was still needed, but they could probably do more with less people. And so I'm finally starting to see those individuals in those roles come back online. And that, I guess, is encouraging, because if, mining providers, solutions providers, or companies that, provide what mines need, are hiring sales guys, then everything is booming. And so we're seeing that, and that's always sort of my indicator. The last one is when they start hiring more HR people. and when we start seeing lots of HR jobs in mining, we know that, like, things have gone off the rails and that we're really busy because they hate adding HR people to their teams for the most part. And that's kind of a joke because I'm an HR person and I get to work with so many of them. But so we're seeing definitely more roles happen across the board. But as I mentioned really early in this conversation, we've been stretched to help fill more technical roles. And it's an area that we've been developing these relationships with over the last 1.5 to 2 years more aggressively. And I think it's actually been a good thing for us because it allows us to access younger individuals who will grow into managers and eventually be people that we work with at a higher level. But establishing those relationships early is key for me. So I've appreciated that challenge a little bit, but
Sure.
man, some of these roles are hard to fill, and those really look like sort of more emerging areas within mining. And so it's like process controls and data sciences and other areas to manage the information around a mine site and some of the automation and technologies that we're using. And that's why I say that mining can kind of be sexy in that regard, because we can steal someone from Tesla or from Google or from some of these other places if they're open to it, that have been really good at that in the past with their other groups. So, but they are hard to come by in our industry, along with electrical engineers, but that's sort of a telltale situation.
Yeah.
That's always the case. But it's interesting because it's forced us to learn and develop some new networks, which has been fun.
Yeah, I agree. I totally fundamentally believe in the power of networking. So I know you do too, and you're good at it. So I appreciate that. Well, recognizing that I'm taking your afternoon here, I've got 2 more questions for you,
Okay.
it's 1 question, 2 parts. But before I do that, I know that you're a list maker and you like to write stuff down, whether you wrote it down or mentally. I think you did a list, even though you said you didn't. I'm pretty sure you did. So what, if anything, did you want to chat about today that we didn't have an opportunity or that I didn't ask?
That's a hard question.
Do you want me to ask you a different one?
No,
repurpose it.
but honestly, I think we covered anything that I would view as important. I think that the area that I was thinking you might ask about or want to talk about is sort of your involvement in capital projects and how you see the industry or challenges that you have that you would anticipate I could help solve in some way. And so it's like racking my brain on where you are in this space and the conversations that you have with so many others on this channel, and what a departure I sort of am from those. And so creating value for your audience and the individuals that are sort of engaged with you, I was like, man, what can I bring to the table here? So I don't have tons of questions, but I was thinking, what in the world is he going to ask me about how I would fix this, I guess.
Okay. So you turn the table on me. I see. I get it. I think that our listeners, our viewers recognize and appreciate that it's not all about geology or metallurgy or, anything like that. And that call it the soft skills or the non-technical skills are really what help people develop relationships, foster a career, live a balanced life, all of the things that I believe to be so fundamentally important. So we like to talk about all aspects of the market because all aspects are important. And I think for the conversation we're having today and thinking about capital projects, we as an industry know that we're screwed when it comes to the resources, the human capital that, as you stated, that are available. And that's, for us, is troublesome. So having a conversation about what are progressive people doing, what's not working, oh, guess what? You actually have to reply to somebody and create a positive experience for them. I think those are all insights that we can glean from what you said. So I appreciate you bringing those forward.
Sure. Well, I hope that you guys aren't screwed and that, by building good teams and fostering relationships and networking, that it all sort of is a nice snowball effect to something a bit easier to manage. But I think having watched a lot of these, I was thinking, man, I am ill prepared. I just get to talk about people for an hour.
That's all good. No, that's all good. Yeah, I think that
Did I answer
I
part two of that question?
I could ask you questions all day, and I could answer your questions all day too. I'm happy to do that. What is coming to my mind, I'm trying to think of the best way to answer your question, or which direction to take it, but I do think that getting creative with Gen Z, I think, is a really interesting topic and an important topic. So thinking about how to create positions where people can make an impact, how to create opportunities for people to get mentored, to get developed. I think those things are significant, and I don't want it to be lost. Maybe for you, because you talk about it a lot, it sounds maybe trivial, but I think for the majority of us that don't occupy the space that you do, it's really good information for us.
I appreciate that. And I think a lot of this stuff that I get to talk about and kind of explore as research, or areas that we're interested in or just hear about, because we do talk to so many people and so many companies. I don't always think of it as valuable because it's just always floating around in my space, but it's really, really difficult. And I understand it's really difficult for especially large mining companies to make these kinds of changes to attract and retain the talent that they need. And so I think that that's the hardest part, is like we just keep getting bigger and bigger. And I absolutely understand what's going on in the industry, and some of it's out of necessity, but sometimes being small in these circumstances will be what allows you to attract this talent. And being agile in how you compensate how you compensate them, and that you can build something that's a bit more customized for each individual. And so I'm encouraged. I really love working with juniors and mid-tiers, and it's great fun. But I think that they might have more ability to attract this younger demographic, because they don't have all the red tape. Because when the big companies make one big change, sort of like it has to blow out to everybody. And making the kinds of changes we're talking about in terms of benefits and flexible arrangements is really difficult, especially on a global scale. So that part I'm not so certain about, but I hope that just the dialogue being available and being creative generally, and having to be creative, will create some change even the bigger companies can deal with.
Yeah, being forced will definitely create that environment that's conducive for innovation, which is where I think we are.
Yeah,
I think you're agreeing with me.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I will ask you my last two-part question.
Okay.
Which is, where do you want the industry to be in 10 years? And the second part is, where do you think it will be in 10 years?
Okay. I think we did a good segue with that last part. So I think in 10 years that we won't be as far as I would like to see us, but that brings me to where I think things should go. Mark Cutifani and a lot of these other great leaders are talking about sustainability, and they're in big companies. And so I think that they're getting it. And I'm really, really encouraged by that. And I think that large companies will force this change, or will be forced to make this change. And so if we have a really strong leader who's willing to talk about sustainability and kind of going with some decarbonization, man, that's a mouthful, or ideas of net zero participation within our industry, that is a really strong precedence. And I love this idea of understanding our resources, utilizing them responsibly and appropriately, and valuing the people who are working really hard to do it. So that's a big vision, and like that, I can't understate that that is a massive, massive undertaking. So creating awareness around that kind of makes it really sexy. And I think that people will want to be involved when they figure out that that's sort of the charge here, and that we are responsible for so much of what we use on a daily basis, that it's not just, create a widget and you're done, or an app or whatever, that it has a lifespan. This is an ongoing sort of cycle that we have to keep pressing forward, and being realistic about what our earth has and the people that we are utilizing to make it happen is really, really key. So distilling that down to, part B, where do I think we're going to be? I think companies are already starting to talk about net zero and decarbonization and being responsible and sustainability. But sometimes it's just talking about it. I'd really like to see, them being more aggressive in this. And some of the numbers make me laugh. It's like, you're one of the largest companies in the world, but you're not going to promise more than 10% of your energy and resources are sort of being offset. It's just a joke, I think. So I think that they could be more aggressive about it. It's costly, but so is the alternative of not doing it. So I think that in 10 years, we'll still be having this struggle. We'll still have our cycles. We're still not going to have enough people. But ideally, we have an awareness, and we're receptive to being a bit more creative. And having done this for 16 years and not seeing very much change happen, even though we've been talking about it, that's why I'm sort of left a little bit about it. But I think that we're being certainly more aware now than we were 16 years ago. So I'm optimistic that, particularly with some of the influence from our very values-based individuals who will be joining our industry, that'll force the change to happen. So I guess I'm optimistic overall.
Got to be optimistic.
Yes.
All right, Lindsey, really appreciate you taking the time for and for your insight and everything. Where can people find you that want to connect and network or learn more?
Absolutely. Well, I will be going to some conferences coming up, which I'm excited about, getting face to face with folks. So I'll be at Women in Mining coming up, and the AEMA conference up in Reno in December. So we'll be at those, and that's always good FaceTime. But in lieu of FaceTime, our website's probably the next best thing. So our website is miningsearch.com, and it will have access to getting in touch with us by email or phone to set anything up, and have articles and jobs and everything else on there. So that's a good way.
Excellent. All right. Well, we'll make sure we've got that linked up in the show notes. But once again, really appreciate you taking the time here today,
Thank
Lindsey.
you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely.